Welcome to Mild History, where the past drifts slowly and quietly, told not in fireworks but in long journeys. If you're watching tonight, let me know where you are sailing from. It helps me know who is out there, listening by lamplight or under the hum of screens. Now imagine sailing the vast, open ocean with no GPS, no compass, no modern charts. Just the stars above you, the horizon ahead, and the creak of oars in the dark. Sounds impossible, doesn't it? And yet, the Vikings did it. For centuries, historians puzzled over how these explorers reached places as distant as North America, navigating waters no European had crossed before. Was it chance? Was it luck? Or was it something more deliberate, a knowledge hidden in plain sight? Tonight, we will let the sails rise slowly and uncover the secret world of Viking navigation. Picture the North Atlantic in the 10th century. Endless water, cold winds, and shifting skies. No landmarks, no maps, no compass needle to point the way. Yet Viking ships cut across this vast unknown with uncanny accuracy. The sagas tell of voyages west to Iceland, to Greenland, even to Vinland, a land many now believe to be coastal North America. For centuries, the common story was that these voyages were strokes of luck, storms blowing ships off course, chance discoveries made by accident. But when we look closer, the evidence suggests something else: intention. The Vikings were not stumbling in the dark. They were calculating. They had tools, not like our compasses or satellites, but tools of sky, sea, and sun. They read cloud formations, the flight of migrating birds, the color of the water itself. They may even have used sunstones, crystals that polarize light, letting them track the hidden position of the sun, even when cloaked in fog. Their ships, long and narrow with shallow drafts, were not just built for raiding. They were built for distance, designed to survive ocean swells while slipping into shallow coasts. When we consider their reach, Iceland by the late 9th century, Greenland by the 10th, Vinland around the year 1000, it becomes clear. These were not accidents. They were deliberate expansions, motivated by trade, settlement, and exploration. Centuries before Columbus, they crossed oceans, not once, but repeatedly. Their achievement was staggering, their knowledge subtle, and their methods unlike anything we imagine today. To understand why the Vikings ventured out, we must return to the world that made them. Scandinavia in the early Middle Ages was a land of contrasts. Long winters and short summers, harsh climates and fertile pockets, fjords and forests. The people who lived there were farmers, fishers, and craftsmen, but also warriors and traders. Their land was rich in timber and iron, but poor in other resources. Population growth strained villages, and opportunities pushed young men outward. They sought silver, land, and prestige. To raid was one path. To trade was another. To settle was yet another. The sea was not a barrier. It was a road, and the longship was the vehicle that made that road possible. The Viking Age, roughly from the late 8th century to the 11th, was not just about raiding monasteries or looting towns, though that is how chroniclers in England and France remembered it. It was about movement. Vikings raided, yes, but they also traded silk from Byzantium, silver from the Caliphate, amber from the Baltic, and walrus ivory from Greenland. They established towns like Dublin and York, blended with local populations, and wove themselves into the fabric of medieval Europe. They founded settlements in Iceland, Greenland, and touched the shores of Vinland. They sailed rivers deep into Russia, reaching Constantinople. To them, the sea was not frightening. It was familiar, a path that could be read, memorized, and mastered. Their expansion westward, from Norway to the Faroe Islands, to Iceland, to Greenland, and finally Vinland, was both practical and visionary. Each step built on the last. Farmers in Norway looked for land in the Faroes. When land grew scarce there, they pressed on to Iceland. From Iceland, Greenland was visible, or at least rumored, and from Greenland came voyages further still. The sagas describe Leif Erikson reaching a land of grapes, wood, and good soil, Vinland. Archaeological excavations at Lance Aux Meadows in Newfoundland confirm Norse presence in North America around the year 1000. This was no accident of storms. It was intention, skill, and a willingness to face the impossible. But how did they manage it? Without compasses, without charts, with only the simplest of instruments, how did Viking navigators avoid drifting endlessly into nothingness? The answer lies in the blend of observation, memory, oral tradition, and tools of nature that they carried with them. Before we dive into those, we must understand the vessel itself, the longship, a masterpiece of design that made Viking exploration possible. The longship was not just a boat. It was an identity. Sleek, symmetrical, and flexible, it could travel swiftly under sail or by oar. Its shallow draft allowed it to glide through shallow rivers and fjords, yet it was sturdy enough to cross the open sea. Clinker-built, with overlapping planks, the design gave it resilience against waves. Its length-to-width ratio allowed for speed, sometimes as much as 12 knots, astonishing for the time. Unlike bulky cargo ships, the longship was agile, turning quickly, landing easily on beaches without harbors. Its flexibility allowed raiders to strike monasteries and vanish, but it also allowed settlers to beach their vessels on foreign shores and unload livestock, timber, and people. The ship itself was a compass of sorts. Its design responded to the sea, giving feedback through its movement. Experienced sailors could feel changes in currents, winds, and swells through the behavior of their ship. In this way, the longship was not only transport, but an instrument of navigation. Every plank, every oar, every ripple across its hull carried information. The symbolism of the longship mattered too. Dragons carved on prows, shields along the sides, sails striped in bold colors. These were not only functional choices, but cultural statements. To sail was to project power, identity, and fear. But beneath the spectacle lay engineering brilliance. The longship was a machine tuned to exploration, conquest, and settlement. Without it, Viking navigation would have been impossible. The knarr, a cargo vessel, also played its role. Broader, deeper, and built for trade rather than speed, it carried goods, animals, and settlers across the seas. While the longship was the spearhead, the knarr was the backbone. Together, they enabled not only raids but migrations. Families, livestock, timber, and supplies all crossed the Atlantic in these ships. This was not only warrior culture. It was colonizing culture, seeking new land, new lives, and new opportunities. The connection between ship and navigator cannot be overstated. To a Viking sailor, the vessel was alive, a partner in survival. Every groan of timber, every shift of weight, every spray of water carried meaning. Navigators read their ships as much as they read the stars. Seamanship was not an abstract science, but a lived knowledge, embodied in generations of experience passed down by memory and oral tradition. The ship was both stage and teacher, carrying its crew across worlds while teaching them how to see. The crew of a Viking longship was more than a band of warriors. They were farmers, craftsmen, traders, and storytellers united by the sea. Every voyage required discipline and cooperation. Rowers worked in rhythm, sails had to be trimmed with precision, and steering oars demanded steady hands. Navigation was not the job of one alone, but of the whole crew, each man attuned to the subtle signs of wind, wave, and sky. The helmsman might guide, but the eyes and ears of all were needed to survive. Oral instructions, warnings, and traditions carried knowledge across generations, ensuring that even in fog or storm, the memory of sea lore kept the ship afloat. In the Viking imagination, the sea was not merely an obstacle. It was a realm alive with gods, spirits, and destiny. Norse mythology was filled with imagery of ships and voyages, of Odin and Thor crossing worlds, of death itself carried across waters in boats. To sail was both practical and symbolic. The sea was a path to wealth and fame, but also a test, a place where courage and endurance were measured. Every departure carried risk, but also meaning. To set sail into the unknown was to step into a story that bound men to gods and ancestors alike. And what stories they made. From Scandinavia's fjords, ships sailed west, stepping stone by stone across the North Atlantic. The Faroes, Iceland, Greenland, Vinland, each landfall a victory of endurance, knowledge, and luck. The sagas preserve these tales, written down centuries later, but echoing with memories of men who had stared across the empty sea and found new worlds. In these stories, navigation was both craft and miracle, human skill meeting divine favor. The line between knowledge and faith blurred, as it often does in history, leaving us to wonder just how much of their success was science and how much was spirit. The Viking Age itself unfolded as a tapestry of movement. Raids on English monasteries brought silver and slaves. Trading voyages reached Byzantium, where Norsemen served as mercenaries in the Varangian Guard. Settlements spread across Ireland, Scotland, and northern France. Towns like Dublin and York flourished under Norse rule, blending cultures into new hybrid societies. The same ships that carried raiders carried traders, settlers, and farmers. Behind every tale of terror in chronicles lay quieter stories of intermarriage, trade, and settlement. Navigation was not just about conquest. It was about connection, linking distant lands into networks of movement. And yet, behind the glory, hardship never ceased. Voyages meant cold winds, wet clothes, cramped quarters, and hunger. Crews huddled under woolen cloaks as spray froze on beards. Storms could split planks, tear sails, and scatter ships across miles of ocean. Supplies spoiled, fresh water ran low, and sickness struck. Shipwrecks were common, and graves of drowned sailors dotted coastlines. The sagas remember triumph, but archaeology remembers loss, wrecks beneath the sea, skeletons buried on remote shores. Navigation was never certain. It was a wager against the sea, one that could pay with land and silver, or with silence beneath the waves. Still, the longship endured. Its very design was a response to this balance of risk and reward. The clinker-built hull flexed with waves instead of resisting them, allowing ships to survive swells that would splinter stiffer craft. Shallow keels let ships beach easily, avoiding the need for harbors. Wide sails, made of wool and soaked in fish oil for weatherproofing, caught winds with power, propelling ships faster than most medieval vessels. Crews could row when winds failed, oars turning men into engines of motion. In every plank and nail, the longship was built for survival and for speed, a marvel of its age and the instrument of Viking expansion. The knarr, too, deserves its place in this story. Broader and deeper than the longship, it carried cargo and settlers. Where the longship was a spear, the knarr was a basket, carrying the substance of migration, livestock, timber, tools, and families. Without the knarr, Iceland could not have been settled, Greenland could not have survived, and voyages to Vinland would have been pointless. It was the uncelebrated partner, less glamorous but essential, a ship of patience rather than power. Its very shape spoke of purpose, stability over speed, endurance over show. Together, longship and knarr turned the North Atlantic from a barrier into a bridge. Archaeology gives us glimpses of these ships. The Gokstad ship, unearthed in Norway, shows the balance of form and function, built around 890. Its oak planks, iron rivets, and graceful curves speak of craftsmen who understood wood as much as water. The Oseberg ship, buried around 834 with two women of high status, reveals not only engineering but artistry, with carvings of animals and knots, sails of bold color, and a prow like a serpent ready to strike. These ships were more than machines. They were symbols, buried as offerings, remembered as treasures, honored as much in death as in life. What made these ships truly remarkable, however, was the knowledge embodied in their use. A longship without a navigator was just wood and cloth. But in the hands of Norse sailors, it became alive, capable of journeys that reshaped history. The ship and the sailor were inseparable. Each voyage required not only courage, but the careful reading of sea and sky, the memory of routes passed down in sagas, and the collective trust of crewmen working in rhythm. Navigation was not a science of instruments, but of senses sharpened by generations, tuned to the pulse of nature itself. So when we ask how the Vikings conquered the seas, we must remember that their first and greatest tool was not a sunstone, nor a bird, nor even a star. It was the ship itself, the longship and the knarr, crafted with care, guided by experience, and lived in as extensions of their sailors. Without these vessels, the Atlantic would have remained a wall. With them, it became a door, opening onto lands that would echo with Norse footsteps centuries before Columbus. Picture yourself standing on the deck of a Viking ship in the middle of the North Atlantic. The water is dark, the horizon endless, and there are no landmarks in sight. The crew pulls steadily at the oars, or the sail creaks as it swells with wind. What tells you which way is home, which way is land, which way is death? For the Vikings, the answer was above them, the sky itself. Long before compasses, mariners across cultures used the stars. For Norse sailors, the northern sky held both promise and challenge. The North Star, Polaris, was a steady guide, hovering above the horizon in the north. Its height in the sky changed with latitude, meaning that experienced sailors could judge roughly how far north or south they had gone simply by looking at how high it stood. For journeys along coasts, this was enough. But for longer voyages, especially across the North Atlantic, the stars became part of a larger toolkit. Star navigation was not simple. Clouds often obscured the sky, and summer voyages in northern latitudes brought the midnight sun, when stars all but vanished. But when visible, constellations carried meaning. The Big Dipper, always circling Polaris, offered orientation. Sailors memorized the rising and setting points of stars on the horizon, aligning their ships by the predictable arc of night. Oral tradition carried these memories. A father might tell his son, "When that star touches the horizon, sail west," when another rises, you are still on course. There were no charts, no astrolabes, just memory, training, and the shared eyes of the crew. The sun itself was another guide. By day, its path gave orientation. At noon, when it was highest, it marked south. In mornings and evenings, its rising and setting fixed east and west. Experienced sailors tracked its arc against the horizon, learning the subtle differences of angle across seasons. Even in cloudy conditions, the glow of the sun through the sky hinted at direction. But clouds were more than an obstacle. They were also a tool, for their shape, color, and movement told of land and weather. Clouds piling up on the horizon might indicate islands or mountains, invisible but present. Yet the sun was not always visible. The North Atlantic is a world of fog, mist, and storms. Here the Vikings may have used something remarkable, the sunstone. Legends and sagas speak of a magical stone that allowed sailors to find the sun even when hidden. For centuries, scholars dismissed this as myth, a flourish of storytelling. But discoveries of crystals such as Iceland's spar, a form of calcite, reopened the debate. These crystals polarize light, splitting it into two rays. By rotating the crystal and observing how light shifts, a skilled user can determine the direction of the sun, even through clouds or after sunset when the sky still glows faintly. Experiments have shown that with training, sunstones can pinpoint the sun's position to within a few degrees, enough to steer a ship. Imagine the scene. The sky is gray, the fog thick, the crew restless. The navigator lifts a crystal to the light, rotates it, watches the shimmer align, and quietly says, "Steer west." No compass needle, no chart, just a shard of stone and experience. Was this truly how they sailed? We cannot be certain. Archaeological proof is scarce. But the sagas hint, the science supports, and the possibility lingers. Perhaps the Vikings carried in their pockets not only iron and wood, but a fragment of crystal that turned clouds into guidance. The mystery of the sunstone captures our imagination, but it was only one tool among many. Nature itself was the navigator's greatest ally. Birds offered vital signs. Migratory paths told of seasons and directions. A sailor releasing a raven from the deck could watch its flight. If it circled and returned, no land was near. If it flew straight and did not return, land lay in that direction. The sagas recount how Floki Vilhjalmsson, a 9th century explorer, released ravens on his way to Iceland, one of which flew straight and led him to land. Such stories are not just myth, they are practical instructions remembered as legend. Other birds offered hints too. Gulls and puffins nest near coasts, their presence suggesting land nearby. The flight patterns of migratory birds hinted at distances and directions, teaching sailors when they strayed too far. To watch the sky was to read a living map. The sea itself spoke. Whales appeared in feeding grounds, marking currents and depths. Fish schools moved with temperature and seasons, their presence guiding sailors through familiar waters. Driftwood floated from rivers, telling of land beyond the horizon. Seaweed clung to the surface, carried from coasts. Even the smell of the air could change, carrying the scent of soil, grass, or flowers when land was near. Experienced navigators learned to read these faint signs, turning the ocean into a book. Perhaps the most subtle tool was the swell of the sea itself. Waves do not simply crash, they roll with patterns. In open ocean, swells run in steady directions, shaped by prevailing winds and currents. But near land, waves reflect, cross, and change. A skilled sailor, lying in the hull of a longship, could feel these differences in their body, the rhythm of the sea shifting with proximity to coasts. This sense is hard to describe, yet navigators across the world, from Polynesia to the Arctic, learned it. The Vikings were no different. Their ships, sensitive to the sea, acted as instruments, amplifying these signals. To read the swell was to feel land through the body itself. Each of these methods alone might fail. Clouds could hide stars. Birds might mislead. Driftwood might float far. Waves could be confusing. But together, they formed a system, a layered net of observation. The navigator combined them, confirmed one sign with another, adjusted constantly. Navigation was not a science of certainty but of probabilities, sharpened by experience and guided by collective memory. This knowledge was not written. It was carried in memory, in sagas, in practice. Fathers taught sons, captains instructed crews, and voyages themselves became lessons. A child growing up near fjords would watch gulls, note currents, hear tales of voyages. By the time he joined a crew, he carried not just muscle for the oar but a lifetime of unconscious training. Seamanship was cultural, woven into daily life. Navigation was not a secret manual. It was a way of seeing. So when we imagine the Vikings setting out, we must not picture reckless men drifting blindly. We must picture trained eyes watching skies, trained hands reading swells, trained memories recalling sagas. Their methods were subtle, fragile even, but together they created pathways across oceans. They sailed not by luck but by craft, their impossible journeys grounded in a quiet mastery of the natural world. Wherever you are tonight, picture yourself at sea. The stars fade behind clouds. The crew murmurs, anxious. A raven is released. It circles once, then vanishes toward the west. The navigator lifts a crystal, tilts it toward the light, and nods. The waves shift beneath your feet, telling of currents unseen. Slowly, the course is adjusted. The horizon remains empty, but the ship continues, steady, deliberate. This was Viking navigation, an art of patience, memory, and subtle signs, enough to cross an ocean centuries before compasses or charts. Imagine lying flat in the belly of a longship, the timber creaking around you, the smell of tar and salt heavy in the air. The waves roll beneath, unseen in the darkness, yet every rise and fall, every subtle shift in rhythm speaks. To the Vikings, the sea was not just water. It was a living map, one that could be read through skin, bones, and patience. Swells in the open ocean move in long, steady lines. Driven by prevailing winds, they march endlessly across the horizon, unbroken and predictable. But near land, something changes. Waves rebound, cross, and twist. The rhythm breaks, the roll of the ship alters, and an experienced sailor feels the difference. Polynesian navigators in the Pacific relied on this art of wave reading, and while the Vikings left no written manuals, it is almost certain they did the same. Their ships, shallow-keeled and flexible, amplified the sea's signals. To lie against the planks was to listen to the world itself. Sound played its role as well. In fog or darkness, the sea could echo. Waves breaking against cliffs created a faint roar, carried on the wind long before land was visible. Birds squawked in patterns that hinted at nesting grounds. Even the barking of seals or the splash of whales could signal coasts or currents. To navigate was to remain alert, not only with eyes but with ears and skin. Still, the greatest challenge remained, finding land. Out on the Atlantic, where days could pass without a glimpse of shore, the art of land finding was life itself. Here the Vikings drew on every sense. The color of the water shifted near coasts, turning greener or browner with sediments from rivers. The smell of the air changed, carrying the faint scent of soil, grass, or flowers. The shape of clouds revealed mountains or forests hidden beyond the horizon, as warm air rose from land to shape their forms. The loom of the land, a band of light above the horizon caused by reflection, sometimes gave away coasts before they could be seen. Smoke from fires, drifting upward, offered proof of settlements or forests burning. Each of these signs was fragile, but together they whispered, land is near. The sagas remember these methods in story form. Floki Vilgerarsson, sailing to Iceland in the 9th century, released ravens to search for land. One returned, one circled, but one flew west and did not come back. Floki followed and found Iceland. Another saga tells of Bjarni Herjolfsson, blown off course from Norway to Greenland, sighting unknown lands but never landing. His tale inspired later voyages, including Leif Erikson's journey to Vinland. In each story, the navigator is more than a man at the tiller. He is a reader of worlds, finding coasts through subtlety and patience. Consider the voyages themselves. From Norway, the Faroes lie about 300 miles west. From the Faroes, Iceland sits another 300 miles beyond. From Iceland to Greenland is about 700 miles, and from Greenland to Vinland perhaps 1,500. Each leg demanded days at sea, supplies of water, food, and courage. To cross these distances with no compass, no chart, no guarantee of success, required more than luck. It required a system of knowledge. To Iceland, voyages became common by the late 9th century. Archaeology shows settlers bringing livestock, timber, and tools, building farms and societies. The sagas tell of Ingolfur Arnarsson founding Reykjavik, his high-seat pillars carried by waves to mark the spot. These were not one-off accidents. Hundreds of ships crossed, establishing a society that thrives to this day. Iceland was no miracle. It was the product of navigators who could repeat their success. From Iceland, Greenland came next. Eric the Red, exiled from Iceland, sailed west around 982 and found land he called Greenland, hoping the name would attract settlers. The voyage was perilous. the seas harsh, the land inhospitable. Yet settlements grew, clinging to fjords, raising sheep and cattle, trading walrus ivory with Europe. For centuries, Greenland remained part of the Norse world, tenuous but real. Its very survival proves the Vikings were not drifting. They were steering, returning, repeating, sustaining across oceans. And then Vinland. Around the year 1000, Leif Erikson sailed from Greenland westward, guided by Bjarni's earlier tales. He found a land of grapes, wild wheat, and good timber. The sagas describe it as fertile, warm compared to Greenland, rich in resources. Archaeology at Lance Aux Meadows in Newfoundland confirms Norse presence, with remains of buildings, ironwork, and tools dating to this era. The voyage to Vinland was not myth. It was history. Imagine that crossing. 2 weeks at sea, perhaps longer, supplies dwindling, eyes searching the horizon. A raven is released, it flies west. The smell of pine drifts on the air. The water turns green. At last, a coastline emerges, forests dense, rivers flowing, land unknown. The crew lands, builds shelters, explores cautiously. For the first time in history, Europeans stand on North American soil. They do not stay forever, but they return again and again, trading, exploring, testing. The voyages to Vinland were not permanent colonization, but they were deliberate exploration. The sagas frame these journeys in mythic tones, of discovery, conflict with indigenous peoples, and eventual retreat. But beneath the stories lies proof of skill. To reach Iceland, Greenland, and Vinland required more than boldness. It required navigators who could read the sea, remember the signs, and trust the knowledge passed from generation to generation. Wherever you are tonight, picture the Atlantic as they saw it. Endless gray water, fog rolling, waves pounding. Days without land, nights without stars. Then a bird flies west and does not return. The air smells faintly of soil. The waves change their rhythm. Slowly, a dark line rises against the horizon. Land. Not chance, not miracle. Knowledge, endurance, and the art of navigation carved from sky, sea, and memory. Knowledge on Viking ships was not written in books or mapped on parchment. It lived in memory, in words spoken from father to son, from helmsman to apprentice, from crew to crew. Navigation was not science in the modern sense. It was an oral art, built on experience, repeated until it became second nature. In a world without compasses or charts, memory itself was the compass, and story itself was the map. The sagas preserve fragments of this world. Though written centuries later, they echo with the rhythms of oral tradition. They tell of voyages, storms, and discoveries, blending fact and legend. They describe ravens released to find land, sunstones held to the sky, the loom of the land rising on the horizon. These were not just stories for entertainment. They were vessels of knowledge, carried in words so they could be remembered. Around fires and longhouses, sailors told of currents, of birds, of landmarks glimpsed through fog. Children listened, learning before they ever set foot on a deck. Oral tradition had its risks. Memories fade, stories change, details are lost. But repetition and practice kept them alive. A navigator did not rely on one man's tale. He listened to many, compared them, tested them. Every voyage became both act and lesson, reinforcing the knowledge of the sea. The rhythm of rowing, the feel of swells, the sight of birds. These were not abstract facts but lived truths, embodied in every journey. This reliance on oral tradition also shaped how failure was remembered. For not every voyage succeeded. The sea claimed lives, scattered fleets, swallowed ships. Sagas hint at journeys that ended in silence, men lost to storms or ice. Archaeology confirms it. Wrecks beneath the sea, graves on remote coasts, abandoned settlements. Greenland's Norse colonies eventually dwindled, cut off by climate change, isolation, and dwindling resources. Vinland was abandoned, its settlements temporary. Navigation carried them far, but it could not overcome every obstacle. Shipwrecks were common. A sudden storm could splinter planks, drive ships onto rocks, scatter crews. Supplies might spoil, leaving men hungry. Water casks might run dry. Sickness spread easily in cramped holds. A single miscalculation could mean days lost, land missed, ships vanishing into the endless Atlantic. For every saga of discovery, there were stories untold of failure. The sea was generous but also merciless. And yet, even in failure, knowledge grew. A wreck might teach where currents shifted dangerously. A missed landfall might teach caution or confirm a rumor. Memory turned failure into lesson, embedding it into the oral map of the seas. In this way, even loss contributed to the art of navigation. The legacy of Viking navigation is profound. Centuries before Columbus, they crossed the Atlantic. They did not do it with charts, sextants, or compasses. They did it with eyes tuned to birds, ears open to waves, crystals held to light, and memories passed through generations. Their achievements remind us that science is not only instruments but observation, not only charts but culture. Navigation was not a tool they held. It was a way of life they lived. When later explorers crossed oceans, they carried compasses, astrolabes, and charts. But even they relied on nature's hints: birds, clouds, swells. In this sense, the Vikings stand as bridge figures. They remind us that the human body itself, eye, ear, skin, and memory, can be the greatest instrument of all. Their methods may seem fragile to us, yet they endured, carrying them to Iceland, Greenland, and North America. Their legacy is also cultural. To this day, sagas are read, longships are reconstructed, and voyages are reenacted. Modern sailors test sunstones, lie in hulls to feel swells, release birds into skies. They find again and again that these methods work. The impossible becomes possible, not by magic, but by patience and skill. So what does it mean to say the Vikings discovered America? Archaeology at Lance aux Meadows proves their presence. Sagas tell of Vinland. But beyond dates and sites, the real story is one of navigation, of men who looked at the sea not as a barrier, but as a path. They crossed it centuries before compasses, centuries before maps, guided by knowledge we still struggle to understand fully. Wherever you are tonight, imagine yourself as one of them. The ship rocks beneath you, the crew rows steadily, the wind tugs at the sail. The horizon is empty, the sky